We learned, well, you've already seen the quadratic formula, but we revisited it. So, oh, it did it again. I got to fix that. Make sure that you write it out properly. Negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Should have done a learning goal today. I didn't have one planned because of the quiz, and that was a last minute change. So we don't have one, but maybe we'll do it later this period, or we'll do it tomorrow. Because you got to make sure you can write the formula correctly. Like, you have got to make sure that you guys get that right. Not even close. I don't know what that means, but spiffy. I don't know what that means. Anyway, and then we also learned yesterday about something called the discriminant that tells us whether or not we have to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so we're going to practice that today and review it, kind of make sure that everybody understands it. And we're going to do a couple of new types of equations. It's not really new. We've seen them before, but just practicing some of the trickier ones. So let's dive into this. We use a quadratic formula if necessary. We're going to factor if we can to solve each equation. What do you notice about the first one and the second one, both that you can see here? There's a few things about them, but what do you notice? What do you see? There's fractions, and we've dealt with those before, but we're going to do the same thing again today. It's the same way. What else? What else about A? Very nice. So we got to put everything over the other side. They're both like that. They're not equal to 0. These things only work. Factoring only works if it's equal to 0. Quadratic formula only works if it's equal to 0. Everything has to do with it being equal to 0. So we're going to do that. We're going to do that step first. 1/4 x squared plus x plus 1/8 equals 0. What do I do next in order to manage the fractions?
You found a number that would clear the denominator.
Very good. So we're going to multiply through by something that's going to clear all the denominators. What do you think that would be? Do you know what it is, Jack? 4 will work for one of them, but not the other. 8. So it's got to be bigger than all of the denominators. So 8 is what will work. So I'm going to write that out over here. I'm going to multiply by 8. And I'm going to show it in red just so it kind of highlights where the 8s go. So oops, I missed one. I'm multiplying everything by 8. And this is going to do nothing. The reason why I missed it is because I already know it's going to do nothing, but you should write it because if you do that out of order, you got to do it to both sides. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. It's important for us to remember that there's a 0 there, so it's not going to change anything, but we still are doing that. Okay? So 8 times 1/4 is the same as 8 divided by 4, so that's going to give me 2. And 8 divided by 8 will give me 1. So this should be 2x squared plus 8x plus 1 equals 0. And is that in a good form now? All done, ready to go? I think so. You might look for a common factor. Maybe there's a common factor in there. If there is, you could divide it out, get rid of it, make your life easier. Does anybody remember what the discriminant is? Just like, not an explanation of it, but yeah, and if you know the quadratic formula, it's in the quadratic formula, b squared minus 4ac. So I'm going to go off to the side and do it. B squared minus 4, thank you. Like it?
I like the shirt especially.
Yeah. Does anybody know what I am? You might have heard. No. No? Do you want to say? No. I'm worried about this. Huh? No. Are you sure? Yeah. No. Jess, you want to guess? You have an idea?
I don't know his name.
Oh, well, who is he? Yeah. So it's the lead singer from the Tragically Hip Gord Downie. He died last year. And this was kind of like the outfit that he wore at his last concert. Yeah. Kind of sad, but okay. Where were we? So b squared minus 4ac equals, and I'm just going to do this on my calculator. And I've said this before, you don't have to write this down. You should do it on your calculator. Okay. So b is 8. So I'm going to go 8 squared minus 4 times 2 times 1, just because if you want to follow along, that's your b, that's your a, and that's your c. Right? We didn't review that because we did that yesterday, but some of you weren't here, so that comes from here. I should have pointed that out before. Okay, so when I do that and I hit equals, I get 56, which means there are definitely solutions, but it's not factorable. How do I know it's not factorable? Yeah, perfect square. So you want to be able to take the square root and get a nice number, right? So it's not, oh, disappeared on us. If it's not a perfect square, it's not factorable, but as long as it's positive, 0 or bigger, as long as it's positive, you can solve it. So it has a solution. If you just do it on your calculator, well, I'll show you an example of this later. If you just do it on your calculator and find it has no solution, then you can just write under the question b squared minus 4ac equals negative whatever, and therefore no solution. So we'll see that later, but you don't have to write it down off to the side, but definitely you want to do it on your calculator. Alexis, did you have a question? Okay. So we have to use the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And again, I like to write this down, and this will be a good review for us as well. A equals b equals c equals. So those are the coefficients of the trinomial when it's written in the right order. A is the x squared coefficient. B is the x coefficient. If those were written out of order, you'd have to rearrange them. And c is the constant. Then just sub in negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 8 squared minus 4 times 2 times 1 over 2 times 2. And I said this yesterday, the great thing about this is the hardest work is already done for me because I already know what that is. Even if I didn't write it down, it's probably still on my calculator. Okay, so I go negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 56 over 4. And then you break it up into two answers. And you can try these. If you have your calculator handy, you can try them on your calculator just to check and make sure you're doing it right. But I'm going to speed us along here a little bit. This one works out to negative 0.13 rounded, and this one works out to negative 3.87 rounded. We good? All right. When we did a decimal, I'm going to have to move some stuff out of the way here. We did a decimal question the other day. I told you don't have to clear the decimals. So you can look back at that note and see that you can just use the decimals as your A, B, and C. But if it's factorable, you wouldn't catch that. And if it's punching decimals into your calculator is a little bit more work. You may be a little bit more likely to make a mistake. So you might want to clear the decimals, especially if it's easy.
For A, do you really have to clear the fraction?
You could use the fractions in the, but again, you got to know how to punch it into your calculator. Like, you're way more likely to make a mistake. You might need brackets in different places. So I would strongly recommend clearing the fraction, but you wouldn't necessarily have to. Okay, so, and then the other thing that we sometimes want is we want the x squared term to be positive because we're just more used to it that way. So and because it doesn't matter which way we go, I'm actually going to move everything that direction. So I'm going to get 0 on this side. And the negative 0, I got to be careful of the order. I want the x squared, then the x, then the constant. So the negative 0.3 comes over and becomes plus 0.3x. And the positive 0.1 becomes negative 0.1. Do you remember how we clear the decimals? In this case, we would multiply by 10. If you had 2 decimal places, you'd have to multiply by 100 or maybe 1,000. But since we only have 1 decimal place everywhere, multiplying by 10 will fix everything. And multiply 10 by 0 is just 0. And then I get 2x squared plus 3x minus 1. I want you to try b squared minus 4ac. Try it on your calculator, see what you get. No, but it would be negative. What I would do is I would then multiply by negative 10. And that would flip all the signs. You'd be totally fine. You're multiplying by 10 anyway. Why not make a negative 10? But you'd have to make sure you flip all the signs. Every extra step is like one more chance of making a little mistake in signs or something. Or you could just use a negative a value. If you're using the quadratic formula anyway, it might not matter as much. If you are, I'll say it again though, if you're factoring, you want to get rid of the negative out in front of the a, I think, because we almost never factor that way, and it's confusing unless you really practice and sit and think about it.
When you are like
Yep.
do you have to put like the actual formula?
Yeah, I want you to write the formula. On a quiz or a test, my rule is usually you got to write the formula once, but if you're using it 2 or 3 times, you don't have to write it every single time, but write it once. But for now, remember what I said, writing it is how you'll memorize it. So for your own practice, I mean, I can't force you to do anything, but make sure that you've memorized it. Write it enough so you've memorized it at least. All right, so now we've got, b squared minus 4ac. Did anybody do it? What does it work out to? 17. Other people get that? So that tells us 17 is not a perfect square. Okay, so it's not factorable, but solvable. B squared minus 4ac is 17. And a is 2, b is 3, c is negative 1. Yep.
Even if it is factorable, are we allowed to use this?
In some cases, no. You're going to be forced to factor. And it's better to, and it's not a good idea to avoid it too early. Like, we're not done the unit yet. So I always say, if anybody's still not confident in their factoring, keep practicing, because once it clicks, you might be fine and you might get it. By the time the test comes around, you will have some choice. It'll just take longer, but you will be able to use it sometimes even if you could have factored. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, we factor. We'll see an example of that. Yeah. The quiz is all about factoring, so we gotta remember how to factor. Oh, okay. Just what it looks like, kind of thing. Okay. All right, let me go here. Yes.
I got 1.
You probably missed the negative, because it's minus 4 times a times negative 1, so you end up being plus. Does that make sense? So you got to watch those negatives, definitely. Negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4. So this is where I actually show the substitution, and there's the negative 1. That changes it to 9 plus 8. So this is negative 3 plus minus the square root of 17 over 4. And again, I'm just going to write this out quickly, but hopefully this is all the same every time you do quadratic formula. So once you've done it a few times, you're good at it. No big deal. We're going to kind of skip through it.
If you do the b squared minus 4ac on the side and you get 17, you still have to show the.
You should show, okay, so on a quiz or a test, you got to write that for one question, and then you don't have to write it every single time, but you should show that, and then you can go straight to that, okay? Like if people are just trying to be lazy, well, too bad. Like, don't be lazy. But some steps, I know they take extra time, and writing out the formula every time save us a bit of time on a test. I don't mind that, but I don't have a lot of sympathy for just being lazy. All right, try these on your calculator again if you want, and I get 0.28 and negative 1.78. That's not what you got? That's what you got? Some people are getting it, some people aren't. Any questions? All right. This one's a good one to review again. There's nothing all that new or interesting about it, but it's good practice expanding. I think I said this the other day. Why don't you try expanding this? So I'm going to freeze it. You try expanding it too, and see if you get it right, just for practice. And if you get it wrong, you could just scratch yours out and write the right one in below, but just for practice. Yeah. Yeah. I hope you're done the first line. I just want to point something out. After I get the first line, I really think it's a good idea to collect like terms on the left side and the right side before trying to move things around. So I would strongly suggest that you do that. So I can add these x terms together, I can add these x terms together, and I can add the cons together. So try that. Make sure you got the right first step. Try to do that. You're right. It should be -7. I don't know where that came from. I guess I multiplied by 3. So then you notice that I've got a trinomial. I had a mistake there, so I fixed it. Just notice that. And then I only have a trinomial, and I have a lot fewer things to move around. Okay, so it's going to be less likely to make a mistake. So I would strongly suggest doing that. Then we have to move everything to one side and set it equal to 0. Okay, and I got this, and what do you notice about this? 12x, or 2x squared plus 12x plus 2. Anybody notice anything? There's a common factor. Very nice. So why not go ahead and do that? And then the thing that I'm left with, only because this is an equation and it's equal to 0, I don't even have to worry about that 2. Okay, I'm just left with this. So when I do b squared minus 4ac, my numbers are all a lot smaller. And you can try it yourself, but I believe you get 32. And what does that mean? Not factorable, got to use a formula. We've done it a bunch of times, so I think we're not. We'll skip, move on. If you want to solve it, I'll do it and put it up online as well. But you got lots of practice coming up anyway, so I don't think we need to. Okay, but to go, and you would use a quadratic formula. We have 2 more quick examples that I want to get to, and I want to give you some time to practice. So this one's already ready, set up for us. No fractions, no decimals, no brackets, nothing like that. Straightforward. Try the discriminant. Go ahead and try it. Be careful of your signs. So when I put -8 in here, and 1 and -20, -8 all squared is 64. If you wrote this wrong on your calculator and you had -64, your answer is going to be wrong, and you're going to often be wrong. So you really got to watch for that. 4 and -4 times -20 is +80. So what does this work out to? What is? 144. And 144 is? Perfect square. So this is factorable. So we are going to factor because we can. And this is, what kind of factoring is this? Simple trinomial. 2 numbers that multiply to 20 and subtract to 8. Anybody know what they are? 10 and 2. Alexis, how do you like that? It's okay?
I just forgot what to do with myself.
Yeah. That's what your quiz is on. Solving equations like that. Okay, one more. What's B? Oh, I'll let you write it down, sorry. Getting ahead of myself here. So what's B? 5. So I'm going to go 5 squared, which is 25, minus 4 times, what's A? Noor, what's A? 1, thank you, times 1 times, and then C is the constant, so that's 11. What do you get? Negative 19. So this is where, as my solution, and shorten it because, like, instead of writing out the entire quadratic formula, I'm going to let you just use the discriminant and say, this equals negative 19, therefore no solution. So by using the discriminant, we're going to save ourselves some work on a question like this. Otherwise, you'd be writing out 3 steps or something to show that it's negative 19. We did one like that the other day, I think, where we showed a whole bunch of work. But that's all you would have to do. But I want you to show this. You can't just say no solution. Just show me that equals a negative, and then you got it. Any questions?